Few have searched as deeply, provoked as consistently, succeeded as profoundly as John Coltrane. Coltrane departed this mortal plane more than 50 years ago. Today he remains among us, more alive than ever. His sound continues to grab the ears of an ever-widening circle of fans. His legend is stone-solid, planted firmly in our culture as that of any 20th century musical giant. The only other jazz musicians with as far-reaching an impact on the cultural terrain are Miles Davis and Louis Armstrong. To Coltrane, a musician was a message giver. Making music was an endeavor tied to a larger, greater good. I humbly asked to be given the means and privilege to make others happy through music, Coltrane wrote in 1964 in a letter to his listeners. Still, Coltrane rises in stature and significance. His compositions and recordings are now permanent parts of the canon of great American music, recognized by the Library of Congress, with many of his pieces inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. All are now required study for young musicians hoping to unlock the secrets of jazz. John William Coltrane was born on September 23, 1926, in Hamlet, North Carolina, growing up in nearby High Point. Coltrane was surrounded by music as a child. His father, John R. Coltrane, worked as a tailor, but had a passion for music, playing several instruments. The younger Coltrane's early influences included jazz legends like Count Basie and Lester Young. By his teens, Coltrane had picked up the alto saxophone and displayed immediate talent. Family life took a tragic turn in 1939 with the passing of Coltrane's father. Financial struggles defined this period for Coltrane, and eventually his mother moved to New Jersey in the hopes of having an improved life. In 1943, he too moved north, specifically to Philadelphia, to make a go of it as a musician. But with the country in the throes of war, he was called to duty and enlisted in the Navy on August 6, 1945, the day the first U.S. atomic bomb was dropped on Japan. He was trained as an apprentice seaman at Sampson Naval Training Station in upstate New York before he was shipped to Pearl Harbor, where he was stationed at the largest posting of African-American servicemen in the world. By the time he got to Hawaii in late 1945, the Navy was downsizing. Coltrane's musical talent was recognized, and he joined the Melody Masters, the bass swing band. He was officially discharged from the Navy on August 8, 1946. Upon his return to civilian life in the summer of 1946, Coltrane landed back in Philadelphia, where he studied at the Granoff School of Music and proceeded to hook up with a number of jazz bands. One of the earliest was a group led by Eddie "Cleanhead" Vinson, who encouraged Coltrane to switch over to tenor sax. Then in the fall of 1949, he signed on with a big band led by famed trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie, remaining with the group for the next year and a half. Coltrane had started to earn a name for himself. But during the 1950s, as was the case with other jazz performers, he developed a substance abuse problem. His talent earned him gigs, but his addictions ended them prematurely. In 1954, Ellington brought Coltrane on temporarily, but soon fired him because of his substance dependency. In 1955, Coltrane received a call from trumpeter Miles Davis. Davis had been successful in the 1940s and was again about to form a quintet. With the addition of Coltrane, the group became known as the First Great Quintet. During this period, Davis released several influential recordings that revealed the first signs of Coltrane's brilliance, including Walkin', Cookin', Relaxin', Workin', and Steamin'. The next several years proved fruitful and artistically rewarding, with albums such as The New Miles Davis Quintet. The quintet disbanded in 1957, due in part to Coltrane's substance abuse. Something happened, though, in 1957 something that can only be characterized as a type of epiphany or spiritual awakening. Coltrane describes it this way: "During the year 1957, I experienced, by the grace of God, a spiritual awakening which was to lead me to a richer, fuller, more productive life. At that time, in gratitude, I humbly asked to be given the means and privilege to make others happy through music. I feel this has been granted through His grace. All praise to God." From this point on, he began to develop ferociously as a musician, as well as to take on a type of spiritual quest. In 1957, after finally kicking his substance abuse habit for good, Coltrane began working with pianist Thelonious Monk. He was also developing as a band leader and solo recording artist, heralded by the release of albums like Blue Train and Soul Train. At the start of a new decade, Coltrane made his debut on Atlantic Records with the groundbreaking Giant Steps, penning all of the material himself. Coltrane rejoined Davis in 1958 and stayed with him until April 1960, working with Cannonball Adderley, pianists Red Garland, Bill Evans, and Wynton Kelly. During this time, he participated in the Davis Sessions, Milestones, and Kinda Blue, and the concert recordings, Miles and Monk at Newport, and Jazz at the Plaza. In autumn 1960, Coltrane led a group that included pianist McCoy Tyner to create My Favorite Things. The bandleader was catapulted to stardom. Over the next several years, Coltrane was applauded, and to a smaller degree, criticized for his sound. His albums from this period included Duke Ellington and John Coltrane, Impressions, and Live at Birdland. By early 1961, the quintet had a celebrated residency at the Village Vanguard, which demonstrated Coltrane's new direction. It included the most experimental music he had played, influenced by Indian music, modal jazz, and free jazz. John Gilmore, a longtime musician with Sun Ra, was particularly influential. During this period, critics were divided in their estimation of Coltrane, who had radically altered his style. Audiences, too, were perplexed. In France, he was booed during his final tour. The criticism may have affected Coltrane. In contrast to the radicalism of his 1961 recordings at the Village Vanguard, his studio albums in the following 2 years were much more conservative. Coltrane had come to see his music as an extension of his religious beliefs. The quartet produced their best-selling album, A Love Supreme, in December 1964. A culmination of much of Coltrane's work up to this point, this 4-part album is a celebration of his faith. The fourth movement of A Love Supreme, Psalm, is in fact a musical setting for an original poem to God written by Coltrane and printed in the album's liner notes. The quartet played A Love Supreme live only 3 times, recorded twice. In July 1965, at a concert in Antibes, France, and in October 1965 in Seattle, Washington. In 1965, John Coltrane married Alice MacLeod. He became stepfather to Alice's daughter Michelle, and later, the couple had 3 other children. In January 1966, Alice Coltrane replaced McCoy Tyner as pianist with John Coltrane's group. She subsequently recorded with John and continued playing with the band until John's death on July 17, 1967. After her husband's death, she continued to forward his musical and spiritual vision and started to release records as a composer and bandleader. More about Alice Coltrane will come in a later video. Coltrane continued to tour with the quartet up until 2 months before his death. He died of liver cancer July 17, 1967. He was 40 years old. This is Alexander from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening.